Okay, welcome to our first biology lesson of the new term. And in this lesson, I'm going to remind you of a few details about the way DNA is stored in the nuclei of cells, specifically human cells in this case, and some of the terminology involved with discussing the DNA and the genetic material in cells. The DNA molecules that make up our chromosomes are wrapped up in proteins and carefully packaged and are tightly bound until a gene needs to express, in which case it unwinds a little bit and then expresses the gene. So what we're going to do is try and understand a little bit about how the DNA looks and what the bits of it might be called. We're just really trying to understand some definitions here. So if I was to pull up a picture here of the human karyotype, which we can see here, if I can try and get this, what we can see on the screen here, you follow the little magnifying glass, is human chromosomes, and they've been photographed and cut out of a stained, carefully cut out of a electron micrograph, and they've been stained with a certain dye that shows different regions of them. And what happens here is that we can cut them out of the photograph and match them up on a big sheet of paper, and that's what's been done. And what we see is the karyotype of this individual, who is a male. So what you see in every cell in the human body, you get 2 copies of chromosome 1, 2 copies of chromosome 2, 2 copies of chromosome 3, etc., etc., all the way down to chromosome 22, which is this little small one here. And then we have the sex chromosomes. This long chromosome here is the X chromosome, and that little short thing there is the Y chromosome. So in every single one of our cells, we have 46 chromosomes made up of 23 pairs. So we've got 2 copies of chromosome 1, 2 copies of chromosome 2. Now, each of these individual chromosomes is a single DNA molecule that runs throughout its entire length in a spiral fashion. And that is a very, very long molecule in terms of chromosome 1, and a much shorter molecule, but still very long, in terms of chromosome 21, chromosome 22, and the Y chromosome. So what we can think of is that DNA strand, the classic DNA strand, the helix pattern, the double helix pattern of DNA, that's what's making up this structure. And because we can see this in an electron micrograph, you can understand that this is tightly coiled, very, very, very long molecule. Now this is all bunched up because the cells that these pictures were taken from were going through mitosis, cell division. But let's expand on that a little bit and have a look at this picture on the whiteboard. So if we can imagine that this is, all of this stuff is just one chromosome from a human cell, we can see that it's a really, really, really long strand, and it's much longer than this. I've just done this as a quick representation. But every now and then, there are bits of the chromosome that are able to express a gene. They're able to, they contain the DNA that can make proteins, and that bit of DNA that can make proteins is called a gene. So up here, maybe none of this area has the code for making proteins, whereas this little bit here, between here and here, has the code for making, in this case, maybe a small protein. All right. So that section of DNA that codes for a protein is called a gene. The chromosome itself is a huge long strand of DNA, most of which doesn't code for proteins. So we have to remember that genes are just small bits of DNA, and the whole chromosome is not made up of genes. It's made up of DNA, of which small parts are genes. Okay. Now remember that there are 2 copies of this chromosome in every cell. So if this was chromosome 1, there's another chromosome 1, and there's another copy of this gene. So this gene occurs, at the very least, in our cells in 2 copies. Now, it's possible that the other copy might be slightly different to this one. There might be a single base change, a slight mutation in that gene in the other copy. So what I would have would be two different alleles. When we see the same gene in two different forms on different chromosomes, we call them alleles of that gene. And there may be more than one allele of any particular gene, but no individual can have more than two alleles because they only have two copies of the chromosome. I hope that makes sense. So let's just go to the summary page and we'll just run through the notes. It's very easy. So humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. Each chromosome is a single long DNA molecule, and each chromosome has many genes, but it's got a lot of DNA in there that isn't genes as well. So the gene's only a small part of the DNA. A gene carries the code for a protein. So that's what genes are. They make proteins. And we talked about protein synthesis last term, and proteins are synthesized through the process of RNA transcription from the gene in the nucleus, which carries a code into the cytoplasm, binds to a ribosome to make a protein. Now, the genes on chromosome 1 are different to the genes in any of the other chromosomes. So all the chromosomes are different. That's why we have all these genes, and they're all distributed across the different chromosomes. And finally, different versions of the same gene are called alleles. And if there's only one copy of the gene in the human genome, then no individual can have more than two copies of that gene because they get one from their dad and they get one from their mum. And that's it. So chromosomes, DNA, genes, they code for proteins, and different versions of the gene are called alleles. That's a brief recap of what we learned and some new words. Alleles are a new word that we're going to use in our genetics. All right. So thanks for listening. Try and if you didn't catch all of that, I'm trying to be really quick so that you can watch these videos over and over again to get them. So I don't want to waste your time watching long videos. So rewind the video, watch that again, go and check other videos, and I'll see you when we start our genetics learning in the next lesson. So let me get back to the cat, and there we go. No, we don't. There we go. All right. Goodbye, and see you in the next lesson.